I want your calls on this. Should the government stop subsidising MPs' meals in Parliament and instead use that money to support food banks? 0207 862 2222 is the number to give us a ring. Now, a petition launched by Westminster's largest food bank has received over 80,000 signatures to support its mission to end subsidised meals for MPs. They say that more than 3 million people in the UK relied on food banks last year, while Parliament's 17 bars and eateries made a loss of 7 million, which was paid for instead by the taxpayer. Now, the North Paddington Food Bank would like to see that money used for essential community services like food banks, which could significantly reduce hunger and poverty. So do MPs need subsidised meals, Daisy?
Well, the question, do they need subsidised meals? No, clearly, very few people, particularly on a very handsome salary, need subsidised meals. I think this is a very clever gimmick, and I applaud the Paddington Food Bank for, we're talking about it, we're talking about MPs, meals, we're talking about food banks and hunger. So they've done a good thing by highlighting it. Actually, having worked in the House of Commons for a long time, over many years in the past, it's the alcohol rather than the food that I think is a real issue. Subsidising food or making the food affordable, a lot of MPs, researchers and staff benefit from that. But charging a sort of 3 or 4 quid for a glass of wine, which would cost you £10 in a
pub around the corner.
Pub around the corner. That seems to me completely bonkers because A, they don't need the booze, and we know that the booze really affects their behaviour. We've seen that have a real detrimental. And I know I sound like a massive party pooper here. It's not like I'm saying they shouldn't drink, but we, the taxpayers, shouldn't be subsidising the alcohol and the bad behaviour that comes with it.
And I suppose, Marvin, Daisy makes a good point that we're talking about MPs having their meals subsidised, but of course it isn't just MPs that work in the Houses of Parliament. We're talking staffers and, even I suppose cleaners and things like that would get the subsidies as well. It's for everybody in there.
Yeah, I think it's important to... The thing I do like about it is that it does create parity in the conversation as to where that money could be used. I think they're just separate conversations. I actually feel like the pay and benefits of MPs should be figured out separately and approved separately, and it shouldn't be voted for in the House of Commons, because it's almost like, would you like to pay me more money to exist? And the question will always be yes, but I think when it comes to...
Well, it is decided independently, and they decide whether to accept it or not, so there is an independent body that decides on it. For me, I think the fact that it still gets voted on by the House of Commons, for me, is wrong, and it should be performative, and it should exist completely outside of it, and it should be ring-fenced and benchmarked against similar jobs, which is not currently being done. The reason why I understand that it makes sense is because people come from different parts of the country and they're able then to travel in, and that makes a lot more sense for them to have parity, because if you have London weighing in terms of your job versus being in Middlesbrough, for example, there are different amounts of economic means that means. It also means travelling and all those types of things. So you're creating parity. The bigger problem is when they talk about food banks, though, and I think this is a slight conflation, is that I think historically when we had a previous government, it was really important to keep ringing the bell and trying to be, this is what is being created by your plans for the country. Now that we have a new leadership, I think the actual main part of the conversation is to directly speak to the Labour Party and say, what are your plans to end or reduce the use and dependency on food banks, which is a great conversation on its own, and hear what they have to say before we start attacking MPs who have just got in. Well, I read a stat that said 7.2 million people were in food insecurity in this country now. So if you're thinking 7 million is what was subsidised to these restaurants and eateries in the Houses of Parliament, that's £1 per person. That isn't going to go very far in terms of a meal, but then it is something. Just to make this clear, though, this isn't a subsidy in the same way that a commercial enterprise might get one. If the Parliament eateries made a profit over a year, then they wouldn't receive any money from the taxpayer, and that profit would then be contributed back into the bars and restaurants in order to keep those prices low. But on year they have made a loss. But on 1 year when they've made a loss, then the difference is made up by the taxpayer. So there is a subsidy involved in that. OK, we've got some pictures here. Rather dismal looking pictures, I have to say, of some of the meals that you can get in the eateries in the Houses of Parliament. So judging by this, I'm not sure you're all going to be rushing out there. This has been posted anonymously by social media users so that you could get a sort of update on what sort of things you could get in the Houses of Parliament. So we're going to go through a couple of pictures here, and I'm going to ask my panel how much they would pay for this meal so we can actually see how much they are subsidised.
I mean, Daisy, how much would you pay for this? I'll tell you what it is. First up, we have miso, sesame, aubergine and smoky tofu with brown rice, spring onions, maple soya sauce. And some extra veg. So extra veg on there, I'm not sure where that is.
So that's basically a Green Party meal.
This is a Green Party meal, yeah. And what would you pay for that?
Well, it looks like something you'd get on an airplane and you'd be quite cross. So, I mean, I'm guessing that cost about £4 or £5 if it was subsidised.
No.
Okay, no, but how much would you pay for it full price? How much do you think if you picked that up somewhere else?
If you went to a takeaway place, it would be £7 or £8.
£7 or £8?
I'm not paying for that. Just to be fundamentally clear.
Okay, but let's say you have to.
I'm talking £1.50 subsidised, £3 if you made me buy it.
Full price? All right. Well, you're not going to be impressed at all. It's subsidised, and it is £3.
That's too much.
70. But
that is very cheap.
It's really cheap.
That is very cheap.
I think what it is the container.
It's the polystyrene
makes
box.
It look really, really cheap.
Yeah,
okay, next up, let's go through them.
Polystyrene costs more. I'll just tell you.
There you go. We have Mediterranean goat's cheese, sweet potato and chickpea samosa with cashew nut cream and carrot slaw. How much do we think you would pay for this in London? It's now on a plate, which makes it feel more expensive, Marvin.
I would pay. I'd pay £9 to £12.
£9 to £12?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. What would you pay, Daisy?
Yeah, £8.
£8. It is a whopping subsidised £3.
Yeah, that's
70. Same price as the other one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's more value for money. I think
plant-based and vegetarian, is that what it is?
they do seem to be, actually, I have to say. Next up, this one, whether this takes your fancy or not. This is buttered tarragon and mushroom sausages. So yeah, they're all plant-based.
Veggie.
Served with chips and baked beans. Baked beans and peas. What would you pay for that, Daisy?
I'm going to say £3.70.
£3.70?
Because I don't like the look of that one.
No, that looks rancid, to be fair.
What are you going for?
I'll say £5 for sport, because I think I would. If someone said £5 for this at a festival, I'd pay it and be okay.
What, a festival you'd pay £20?
Yeah, that's
you
true.
Have to. You're stuck
that's
there.
True.
It is £5.20, so that's the most expensive one.
I have good
taste.
taste.
Is it baked beans and chips? Interesting.
And baked beans and peas. That's double legume. That's just not.
Double legume.
Asking for trouble.
I'm not liking that at all.
Okay, let's go to the calls then and find out whether we think we should stop subsidising MPs' meals, start using that money to put into food banks. Jack from Cheshire, what do you think about this proposal?
Do you know something? I feel so sorry for the MPs being on a paltry basic pay of £90,000 a year. And with all the expenses that they claim, I really do feel sorry for them. And the very fact that they have to use expenses claimed off the British working taxpayer to then employ an accountant to avoid paying as much tax as they can.
I feel, Jack, that your tongue is placed firmly in your cheek. So, Jack, I'm hearing the sarcasm.
As a whole nation.
We've got it.
Jack.
We've got your sarcasm, Jack. But I'd like to add into the fray that it's not just MPs' meals that are being subsidised. This is their staffers' meals. This is everybody, not necessarily on a good wage. In fact, a lot of them probably on fairly minimum wage. Shouldn't they get, I mean, they work long, silly hours. Shouldn't they get their meals subsidised?
Well, realistically, the people who work in Parliament, the cleaners and the like, and the people working in the kitchens should be on nothing less than 60% of what the MPs are getting, just to put up with the MPs, who are no doubt slightly inebriated with all the alcohol and a bit high on the cocaine that they're snorting in the toilet.
Well, okay, you're making accusations there that, you know, you're obviously being very general. And we'll move on from that.
Actually, he's making a very valid point, and Marvin muttered unfounded. It wasn't unfounded. They've done loads of reports in the House of Commons where they've gone around sampling.
But we don't know whether that was the MPs or the staffers or who it was. Jack was asserting that it was the MPs, which is a bit of a jump.
No, that's true, but we do know there is a lot of parliamentary cocaine use.
But there is definitely cocaine in the Houses of Parliament, or has been at times historically, and also alcohol consumption, and we do know that is MPs because that has been reported that some people have been particularly inebriated actually in some of these bars and restaurants. Okay, Jack, with all that put to one side, you still don't think, even though everyone that visits the Houses of Parliament, not just MPs, get these subsidised meals, you still don't think they should be subsidised? You think everyone in that workplace should have to pay full price? Jack? Nope, you gave us your sarcasm and left. I like your work. Jack, thank you for your call. Bill from the Wirral, what's your view on this one? Do you think that we should stop these subsidies?
Good morning, everybody. Yes, I do believe this, and I'll explain why. In the outside world, in negotiations for pay rises between unions and managements, the unions have to sacrifice parts of their benefits, usually to get a pay rise. And for the past 300 years, the MPs have been getting away with rises above inflation, and the subsidies have remained. They've not had to give up anything. I think it is time that they should start suffering as the outside world does.
Okay. There was a lot to take in there, Bill. So I hear that you're annoyed about how much that the MPs are getting paid. So I'll reiterate that it's not just MPs that are getting these subsidised meals. So that's one part. But what do you think about the idea that that money being used could go to food banks? We're talking about £7 million here. Do you think that that is enough? Is that going to cure our food poverty in this country?
No, I don't believe it will. But I agree with the principle. By the way, about the lower paid workers in Parliament, the staff, you would say, there should be a minimum, let's say, 35,000 a year or 40,000 a year. Below that, they could get their meals still subsidised, but those above it pay the full price.
Okay, so it's a sort of means-tested subsidy, and maybe that would be better. But I think you're much more focused on the subsidy being wrong than where that money should go, I suppose.
Bill does make a really good point, because a lot of the MPs really take the mickey about what they pay their staff. And my first job ever was as a Commons researcher, and I was paid 50 quid a week. Now, admittedly, it was 100 years. It was literally more than 30 years ago.
But
even in the early 90s, which is when it was, you couldn't live on £50. It was £10 a day I was earning. The only reason I could do that job was because my parents lived in London, which automatically means I had this ridiculous advantage over, other kids and youngsters who wanted to work in the House of Commons. You add on top of that basically the MPs know that they're going to have loads of applicants for these jobs. They can pay total peanuts, and they can say you get basically subsidised food, so you can eat cheaply. But they're basically giving an advantage to people who already have an advantage because they're living in London off the bank of mum and dad. So it does need, that bit really needs to be sorted out,
actually,
so that it's fairer.
Something that Jack mentioned as well, that the lowest paid workers should only earn, 60, they should only be able to be paid 60% more or something. I can't remember, but there should be a sort of a relationship between the lowest paid and the highest paid in the same workplace is something we've discussed before.
The whole attitude towards MPs at the moment is definitely at an all-time low, and there's very little sympathy or care for the context in which they work in, the hours that they work and how difficult. Also, it's a very public-facing job where you get harassment and abuse very much often. And I think it's actually quite interesting. I do like the idea of reviewing it, and I think when Labour came in and talked about reform, I would love to see reform in areas like this and be a lot more transparent, and then actually we can say whether we feel that this is appropriate or not. Because we do
we know that we subsidise them 7.2 million or 7 million, let's just say, let's round it down, shall we? 7 million, so they are fairly transparent on what they're doing.
I think in terms of what next, I think that's what part of being transparent. We all need to sign up and agree that we're happy. If we have really good MPs, it does change how you feel about it a little bit when things are being sorted.
And you do need them to have a decent workplace. I mean, do you remember all the fuss and hoo-ha when they were trying to get a creche into the Commons so that, particularly with the long hours, you could have more working mums that might be able to... And they wanted to turn the rifle range, the shooting range, into a creche. And there was absolute outrage at how could they do this, and the fuss about breastfeeding in the House of Commons. So the House of Commons does need to modernise, because otherwise we're going to end up with all the Buffed and Tuftons, who are the only people who can do that job.
Bill, thank you very much for your call. Diane from Northumberland, what's your view on getting rid of these subsidies at the eateries in the Houses of Parliament? Would you be for it or against it?
well, looking at those meals, I was shocked.
I was quite shocked as well, and I don't mean to poo-poo the chefs in the House of Parliament. I'm sure they're incredibly skilled, but maybe they're not working with very much. But the pictures, it looks kind of canteen foodie. Am I allowed to say that? It looks like something you would get at school dinners.
Well, excuse me, I did 30 years in school dinners. I give my children for my teachers.
I'm sure you were. I'm sure you cooked some fabulous meals, Diane.
No, what I wanted to say, there was an article in the Mirror where there was 625,000 meals wasted last year. And it says there's 3.2 million people go hungry.
So where were the meals wasted? Sorry, I missed that point. I was too embarrassed about my previous comment. Where were the meals wasted?
In the Houses of Parliament.
What, they were just throwing them away?
Yes.
Well, I haven't heard about that, Diane. You brought that to my attention, but certainly food wastage is something that we all need to be careful of.
The Sunday Mirror on the 3rd of March.
Nice, Diane. Somebody knows how to do her research. So you think maybe we need to sort that out before we sort out no, I was going to call them school dinners again. Before we sort out the meals.
Oh, no.
And also, Diane's point, Westminster, I think, has the highest amount of hunger and homelessness and therefore reliance on food banks and stuff. So we've got the House of Commons right in the middle of Westminster chucking out a load of perfectly good food and all those hungry people. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, you feel like there's some sort of conversation that could be had. Diane, thanks for bringing that to our attention. We're going to speak to another Diane now from Tervine. What is your thoughts on these subsidies? What's your thoughts on the meals as well? I rather rudely called them school dinners, but would you be happy to pay £5.20 for that?
Well, I think I would, but I think it's a very good idea to do this. I think so, and I think any compassionate MP would agree with it, because, you know, it's logical that you wouldn't have subsidy if people are going hungry. No, I think they would, honestly, Storm, I would think that they would be up for that, because if you're a compassionate MP, you would do that. That's what I would do if I was an MP. Well, I would say yes, I don't want subsidy.
Potentially, Diane. But we have to remember that the MPs are conscious of the fact that this food is also subsidised for their staffers and the people that work for them that aren't earning a huge amount of money. And on top of that, the other criticism to getting rid of these subsidies in order to help food banks, as Marvin alluded to earlier on in the conversation, is that 7 million, although it sounds like a lot of money, would help, but it wouldn't end food poverty in this country, and it wouldn't help every single person very much. So actually a gimmick like that could just paper over the cracks, when actually what we need is someone to come in and overhaul the system so that we have less food poverty, we have less people reliant on food banks.
Yeah, and also, so I'm not going off the subject, but now that we've got a new government, so we've got to get rid of all this expenses that's way over the top, that they don't, you know, they're going far beyond that they should be claiming. You know, a decent MP wouldn't be claiming all this, i.e. a TV licence. A lot of them are claiming this TV licence. And the blinds have got to pay half price because they can hear but they can't see. If
Diane,
they give up...
I hear what you're saying. It's definitely part of the conversation. Yourself and a few of our other previous callers are very upset just about the amount that MPs get generally, never mind these sorts of subsidies. But anyway, this is a petition that is run by North Paddington Food Bank. It's Westminster's biggest food bank. They've got 80,000 signatures currently, roughly. So we'll see where that goes. Diane, thank you for your call. Thanks for all your calls on this. We are